Chapter 2. The helping hands didn't stop swarming around him until Thomas stood up straight and had the dust brushed from his shirt and pants. Still dazzled by the light, he staggered a bit. He was consumed with curiosity, but still felt too ill to look closely at his surroundings. His new companion said nothing as he swiveled his head around, trying to take it all in. As he rotated in a slow circle, the other kids snickered and stared. Some reached out and poked him with a finger. There had to be at least 50 of him. Their clothes smudged and sweaty as if they had been hard at work, all shapes and sizes and races, their hair of varying lengths. Thomas suddenly felt dizzy, his eyes flickering between the boys and the bizarre place in which he'd found himself. They stood in a vast courtyard several times the size of a football field, surrounded by 4 enormous walls made of grey stone covered in a spot of thick ivy. The walls had to be 100 feet high and formed a perfect square around them, each side split in the exact middle by an opening as tall as the walls themselves. From what Thomas could see, they led to passages and long corridors beyond. "Look at the green bean," a scratchy voice said. Thomas couldn't see who it came from. "Gotta break his shuck, Nick and chicken out that new digs," Sour Boy laughed. "Show your voice, Gally," a deeper voice responded. "Shut your voice, Gally," a deeper voice responded. Thomas focused back on the dozens of strangers around him. He knew he must look out of it. He felt like he'd been drugged. A tall kid with blonde hair and a square jaw sniffed at him, his face devoid of expression. A short, pudgy boy fidgeted back and forth on his feet, looking up at Thomas with wide eyes. A thick, heavily muscled Asian kid folded his arms as he studied Thomas. His tight shirtless sleeves rolled up off his biceps. A dark-skinned boy frowned, the same one who'd welcomed him. Countless others stared. "Where am I?" Thomas asked, surprised at hearing his voice for the first time in salvageable memory. It didn't sound quite right, higher than he would have imagined. "Nowhere good," though came from the dark-skinned boy. "Just slim yourself, nice and calm." "Which keeper are you gonna get?" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "I told ya, shackface," a shrill voice responded. "He's a clunk, so he'll be a slop and no doubt about it." The kid giggled like it just said the funniest thing in history. Thomas once again felt a pressing ache of confusion, hearing so many words and phrases that didn't make sense. Shank, shuck, keeper, slopper popped out of the boy's mouth so naturally it seemed odd for him to not understand it. It was as if his memory loss had been stolen, a clunk of his language. It was disorienting. Different emotions battled for dominance in his mind and heart: confusion, curiosity, panic, fear. But laced through it all was the dark feeling of utter hopelessness, like the world had ended around him, had been wiped from his memory, and replaced with something awful. He wanted to run and hide away from these people. The scratchy-voiced boy was still talking. "Even do that much? Bet my liver on it." Thomas still couldn't see his face. "I said shut your hole." "I said shut your hole," the dark boy yelled. "Keep yapping and I'll break it in half." This must be their leader, Thomas realized, hating how everyone squawked at him. He concentrated on studying the place the boy had called the glade. The floor of the courtyard looked like it was made of huge stone blocks, and many of them cracked and filled with long grasses and weed. An odd, dilapidated wooden building near one of the corners of the square contrasted greatly with the grey stone. A few trees surrounded it, the roots like gnarled hands digging into the rock floor for food. Another corner of the compound held gardens. From where he was standing, Thomas recognized corn, tomato plants, and fruit trees. Across the courtyard from there stood wooden pens, holding sheep and pigs and cows. A large grove of trees filled the final corner. The closest one looks crippled and close to dying. The sky overhead was cloudless and blue, but Thomas could see no signs of the sun, despite the brightness of the day. The creeping shadow of the walls didn't reveal the time or the direction. It could be early in the morning or late in the afternoon. As he breathed in deeply, trying to settle his nerves, a mixture of smells bombarded him: freshly turned dirt, manure, pine, something rotten, and something sweet. Somehow he knew these were the smells of a farm. Thomas looked back at his captors, feeling awkward but desperate to the questions Captors, he thought. Then, why did that word pop into my head? He scanned the faces, taking in each expression, judging them. One boy's eyes flared with hatred, stopping him cold. He looked so angry. Thomas wouldn't have been surprised if the boy came up to him with a knife. He had black hair. When they made contact, the boy shook his head and turned away, walking towards a greasy iron pole with a wooden bench next to it. A multicolored flag hung limply at the top of the pole. No wind to reveal its patterns. Shaken, Thomas stared at the boy's back until he turned and took a seat. Thomas quickly looked away. Suddenly, the leader of the group, perhaps he was 17, took a step forward. He wore normal clothes. T-shirts, jeans, and tennis shoes. A digital watch. For some reason, the clothing here surprised Thomas. It seemed like everyone would be wearing something more menacing, like prison garb. The dark-skinned boy had short cropped hair, his face clean-shaven, but other than the permanent scowl, there was nothing scary about him. "It's a long story, Shank," the boy said. "Piece by piece, you'll learn. I'll be taking you on the tour tomorrow. Till then, just don't break anything." He held a hand out. "Name's Albie." He waited, clearly wanting to shake hands. Thomas refused. Some instinct took over his actions, and without saying anything, he turned away from Albie and walked to the nearest tree, where he plopped down to sit with his back against the rough bark. Panic swelled in him once again, almost too much to bear. But he took a deep breath and forced himself to try and accept the situation. Just go with it, he thought. You won't figure out anything if you give in to fear. "Then tell me," Thomas called out, struggling to keep his voice even. "Tell me the long story." Albie glanced at the friends closest to him, rolling his eyes. Thomas studied the crowd again. His original estimate had been close. There was probably 50 or 60 of them, ranging from boys in their mid-teens to young adults like Albie, who seemed to be one of the oldest. At that moment, Thomas realized with sickening lurch that he had no idea how old he was. His heart sank at the thought. He was so lost. He didn't even know his own age. "Seriously," he said, giving up a show of courage. "Where am I?" Albie walked over to him and sat down cross-legged. The crowd of boys followed and packed in behind him. Heads popped up there, kids leaning in every direction to get a better look. "If you ain't scared," Albie said, "you ain't human. Act any different and I'll throw you off a cliff, 'cause that means you're some sort of psycho." "The cliff?" Thomas asked, blood draining from his face. "Shuck it," Albie said, rubbing his eyes. "Ain't no way to start these conversations, you get me? We don't kill shanks like you here, I promise. Just try and avoid being killed to survive. Whatever." He paused, and Thomas realized his face must have widened, even more when he heard the last part. "Man," then ran his hands over his short hair as he let out a long sigh. "I ain't good at this. You're the first green bean here since Nick was killed." Thomas' eye widened, and another boy stepped up and playfully slapped Albie across the head. "Wait for the bloody tour, Albie." His voice was thick with a weird accent. "Kid's gonna have a bugging heart attack. Nothing's ever been heard yet." He bent down and extended his hands towards Thomas. "Name's Nuke, Greenie, and we'll be right cheery if you forgive this clunk for Brain's new leader here." Thomas reached out and shook the boy's hand. He seemed a lot nicer than Albie. Newt was taller than Albie too, but looked to be over a year or so younger. His hair was blonde and cut long, cascading over his t-shirt. Veins stuck out of his muscled arms. "Pipe it, shuckface," Albie grunted, pulling Newt down to sit next to him. "At least he can fully understand half of my words." There was a few scattering laughs. Then everyone gathered behind Newt and Albie, packing in even tighter, waiting to hear what they said. Albie spread out his arms, palms up. "This place is called the Glade, alright? It's where we live, where we eat, where we sleep. We call ourselves the Gladers. That's all you..." "Who sent me here?" Thomas demanded, fear finally giving away in anger. But Albie's hand shot out before he could finish, grabbing Thomas by the shirt as he leaned forward to his knees. "Get up, Shank, get up." Albie stood fully, pulling Thomas with him. Thomas finally got his feet under him. Scared all over again, he backed against the tree, trying to back away from Albie, who stayed right in his face. "No interruptions, boy," Albie shouted. "Wackerfoot told you everything. You died on the spot right after he clunked your pants. Beggars dragged you off, and then you ain't good for us then, are you?" don't know even what you're talking about, Thomas said slowly, shocked at how steady his voice sounded. Newt reached out and grabbed Albie by the shoulders. Albie, lay off a bit. You're hurting him more than you're helping. Albie let go of Thomas' shirt and stepped back, his chest heaving with breath. Ain't got time to be nice, Green Bean. Old life's over. New life begins. Learn the rules quick. Listen, don't talk. You get me? Thomas looked over Newt, hoping for help. Everything inside him churned and hurt. The tears had yet to come, burned his eyes. Newt nodded. Greenie, you get him, all right? He nodded again. Thomas fumed, wanting to punch someone. He simply said, yeah. Good vet. First day, and that's what it's here for you. Night's coming. Runners will be back soon. The Bucks came late today, and I ain't got time for two. Tomorrow morning, right after the wake up. He turned toward Newt. Get him to sleep. Good's that? Newt said. Albie's eyes returned to Thomas, narrowing. A few weeks, you'll be happy, Shank. You'll be happy and helping. None of us knew Jacques on the first day. You neither. New life begins tomorrow. Albie turned and pushed his way to the crowd, then headed for the standard wood building in the corner. Most of the kids wandered away, each one giving Thomas a lingering look before they walked off. Thomas folded his arms, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Emptiness ate away at his insides, quickly replaced by sadness that hurt his heart. It was all too much. Where was he? What was this place? Was it some kind of prison? If so, why had he been sent here, and for how long? The language was odd. None of the boys seemed to care whether he lived or died. Tears threatened to fill his eyes, but he refused to let them come. What did I do? He whispered, not really meaning for anyone to hear him. What did I do? Why did they send me here? Newt clapped him on the shoulder. Greenie, what you feeling? We've all felt it. We've all had a first day. Came out of the dog box. Things are bad. They are. They'll just get much worse soon. That's the truth. But by down the road of peace, you'll be fighting true and good. I can tell you ain't a bloody sissy. Is this a prison? Thomas asked. He dug in the darkness of his thoughts, trying to find a crack on his past. Done asked 4 questions now, haven't you? Newt replied. No good answers, don't you? Not yet. Anyway, best be quiet now. Accept the change. Morning comes tomorrow. Thomas said nothing. His head sunk, his eyes staring at the cracked rocky ground. A line of small-leaved weeds ran along the edge of the stone blocks, tiny yellow flowers peeping through as if searching for the long sun, long disappeared behind the walls of the glade. Chuck'll be a good fit for ya, Newt said. Wee little fat shank, but nice sapping all when he's done. Stay here, I'll be back. Newt had barely finished his sentence when all of a sudden a piercing scream ran through the air, high and shrill. A barely human shriek echoed across the stone. Every kid in sight turned to look towards the source. Thomas felt his blood turn ice cold as he realized the horrible sound came from the wooden building. Even Newt had jumped as he started, his forehead creasing in concern. Shuck it, he said. Can't the bloody mid-head jacks handle that boy for 10 minutes without needing my help? He shook his head and lightly kicked Thomas on the foot. Fine, Chucky. Tell him he's in charge of your sleeping arrangements. Then he turned around and headed in the direction of the building, running. Thomas slid down the rough face of the tree until he sat on the ground again. He shrank back against the bark, closed his eyes, wishing he could wake up from the terrible, terrible dream.